This is how far they'll go when you say no. I had barely rinsed my hands from the trough when she marched up with her crew, clanging a set of so-called master keys, acting like my gate was just another community door. She didn't ask, she didn't knock, she just attacked the lockbox like she had a right. And the way she glared when I told her to stop, I swear, for a second I wondered if I'd lose my own property to someone's obsession. Leave a comment, hit like, subscribe, and if you'd like to help the channel grow, that little thanks button down below means a lot. Am I crazy for thinking this crossed every line? It was one of those late afternoons where the sun hits just right, casting long shadows across my farm property. I'd just finished feeding the cattle and was washing my hands at the outdoor spigot when I heard footsteps crunching on gravel. Linda Carter, our HOA president, was marching toward my SID gate with Rick Stone and 2 other maintenance crew members trailing behind her. She was clutching this massive ring of keys that I looked official enough to unlock Fort Knox. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked over, curious but not alarmed. Linda's been the neighborhood busybody since she moved in 3 years ago, always finding new regulations to enforce. But this felt different. She had that determined look people get when they've convinced themselves they're absolutely right about something. The maintenance crew hung back a few feet, and I noticed Rick was carrying some kind of spray paint canister. "Jordan, we need access for the annual fire lane inspection," Linda announced, not bothering with pleasantries. She held up her key ring like it was some kind of badge of authority. "These are the community master keys for emergency access points." I watched her approach my personal lockbox, the one I'd installed myself on the wall next to my gate. It's clearly marked as private property, with my own combination lock that I change monthly. The sound started immediately. Click, click, click. Linda was jamming different keys into my lockbox, each one failing to turn. She tried a brass key, then a silver one, then what looked like a skeleton key. None of them fit, obviously, because these were my personal locks on my private property. I stood there watching this bizarre performance, wondering if she'd lost her mind or if I was missing something obvious. "Ma'am, that's my personal security system," I said, keeping my voice level. "Those master keys you have are for community areas, not private property." Linda ignored me completely and kept trying keys. The clicking got more aggressive, and she started yanking on the lockbox itself when the keys wouldn't turn. I could see paint flakes falling from where she was scratching up my gate. That's when I pulled out my phone and started recording. Something told me this was about to go sideways fast. "Linda, I need you to stop tampering with my private property. I deny access to my land. There's no emergency here, and I haven't given consent for any inspection." My voice was calm, but my heart was starting to race. Was I supposed to just let her destroy my lockbox? Linda's face flushed red, and she spun around to face me with fury I'd never seen before. "I have authority for community safety inspections under HOA emergency protocols," she shouted. The maintenance crew shifted uncomfortably behind her. Even Rick looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "This fire lane access is mandatory for insurance compliance." I pointed to the sign mounted right next to my lockbox. Big, clear lettering that reads, "Private property, no HOA, access without written consent." "Linda, read the sign. This is my property, not community property. Your authority doesn't extend to private land without legal easements or court orders." The words felt strange coming out of my mouth. When did I become the person who had to explain basic property rights to a grown adult? That's when Linda completely lost it. She started yanking harder on my lockbox, and I could hear metal scraping against metal. Paint was definitely getting scratched off my gate. "You're obstructing community safety," she screamed, pulling out her cell phone. "I'm calling the police." I couldn't believe what I was watching. A grown woman was having a meltdown because she couldn't break into my private lockbox with her community keys. "Go ahead and call them," I said, still recording. "I'd love to hear what law enforcement has to say about your authority to access private property." Honestly, part of me was terrified they'd side with her. She sounded so official, so convinced that she had the right to do what she was doing. Maybe there was some HOA regulation I didn't know about? Linda dialed 911 right there in front of me. Yes, I need officers at 47 Meadowbrook Lane. A resident is obstructing emergency access and interfering with community safety inspections. She was breathing hard, still clutching those useless master keys. The maintenance crew looked like they wanted to disappear into the ground. Within 15 minutes, 2 police officers arrived. Officer Martinez and Officer Johnson stepped out of their squad car and immediately assessed the situation. Linda rushed toward them, waving her keyring and pointing at my lockbox. Officers, this resident is preventing mandatory safety inspections. I have authority under HOA emergency protocols. Officer Martinez looked at Linda, then at me, then at the obvious private property sign next to my lockbox. Ma'am, what specific authority do you have to access private property? He asked Linda directly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Officer Johnson was already examining my gate and the scratched paint where Linda had been yanking on the lockbox. I'm the HOA president. These are community emergency access keys, Linda sputtered, holding up her keyring again. She looked genuinely confused that the officers weren't immediately taking her side. Insurance requires annual vegetation clearance inspections. Officer Martinez turned to me. Sir, can I see your property deed or documentation? I walked into my house and came back with my deed and property survey. The officer studied the documents carefully, tracing the property lines with their fingers. Officer Johnson looked up at Linda. Ma'am, this appears to be private property. HOA authority doesn't extend to private land access without easements or court orders. The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's face went from red to pale in about 5 seconds. But the fire lane, community safety, she stammered. Officer Martinez closed my deed folder and handed it back to me. This appears to be a civil dispute. Without legal easements or emergency circumstances, property owners have the right to deny access. Rick finally spoke up from behind Linda. Boss, maybe we should check with the county about those access rights before we... Linda cut him off with a sharp look that could have melted steel. The officers exchanged glances that suggested they'd seen this type of situation before. If there are ongoing disputes about property access, you'll need to resolve them through proper legal channels, Officer Johnson said diplomatically. We can't enforce HOA regulations that exceed legal authority. They took down basic information from both of us and left without issuing any citations. After the police drove away, Linda stood there clutching her master keys like they'd somehow betrayed her. The maintenance crew was already walking back toward their truck, clearly done with whatever this mission was supposed to be. I felt a mix of relief and dread. My heart had finally stopped pounding, but I could see in Linda's eyes that this wasn't over. This isn't finished, Jordan, Linda said quietly, her voice now cold instead of screaming. There are proper procedures for community compliance, and you will follow them. She turned and walked away, still holding those useless master keys. I stood there for a long time after they left, staring at the scratches on my gate and trying to process what had just happened. Those master keys obviously opened community lockboxes, mailbox clusters, maybe pool gates, but they sure couldn't open common sense or legal authority. My hands were shaking slightly as I examined the damage to my lockbox. I didn't know if that notice they posted was legitimate authority or overreach about to backfire. 2 days after the master key drama, I spotted a heavy envelope stuck to my front door. The return line said Pinnacle Property Management, and the paper inside was typed on sleek letterhead that oozed stiff authority. Annual vegetation clearance inspection required for community fire insurance, it declared in large letters. Access will occur between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. weekdays. Cooperation is mandatory for continued coverage. I read the notice again and again, wondering if I was overlooking something obvious. The wording felt sharp enough to make me uneasy, but the tone was wrong from the start. Mandatory cooperation? Since when could insurance firms claim power to break into private land? I decided to look closer before Linda appeared, swinging those master keys once more. My first move was dialing county code enforcement. I assumed if anyone knew about HOA inspection limits, it would be those who handled actual building codes. The clerk who answered the call sounded like she'd heard this complaint before. HOA boards can request inspections for insurance purposes, she explained calmly, but they cannot force entry to private land without recorded violations or formal easements. That term landed like a punch. Easements. What counts as a legal easement exactly? I asked, snatching a pen for notes. Written agreements filed with the county, utility access rights, or court-ordered entry for defined purposes, she replied. Property owners retain the right to refuse entry unless there is explicit lawful authority. I ended the call feeling steadier, but still curious about the insurance angle. These firms don't play light with liability, so maybe there was some truth in Linda's noise about compliance needs. I spent the next hour scanning through my homeowner's insurance policy, hunting for any clause on forced inspections or HOA access powers. The policy was thick as a phone book and written in that special insurance language designed to confuse normal humans. But after reading through the fine print twice, I found the relevant section. Insurance companies need documented compliance for vegetation management, it stated clearly, but access must be obtained through legal means, consistent with property rights and local regulations. Legal means. There it was again. Insurers required evidence that fire safety rules were followed, but they couldn't simply empower anyone to break into private land to collect it. I was starting to see why Linda had looked so agitated during her master key frenzy. She wanted access for real insurance needs, but she lacked the lawful power to obtain it. That's when I decided to call my insurance agent directly. Tom Bradley had been handling my farm coverage for 8 years, and he had always been straight with me about policy requirements. Tom, I need to understand something about HOA inspection requirements, I said when he picked up. Can the community association force access to my property for insurance compliance? Tom's answer was immediate and clear. Jordan, absolutely not. Insurance requirements must be met through legal access methods. If the HOA doesn't have documented easement rights, they can't force entry to your property. He paused, and I could hear him typing on his computer. Actually, let me check your specific policy. Your farm is listed as private agricultural property with no community access obligations. That confirmation felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. My insurance coverage didn't depend on Linda's ability to break into my property with her master keys. The requirements she kept shouting about were either misunderstood or deliberately misrepresented. Tom, what happens if the HOA claims they need access for community insurance purposes? I asked. They'd need to prove they have legal authority through recorded easements or court orders, Tom replied. Community insurance requirements can't override individual property rights. If they're claiming otherwise, they're probably exceeding their legitimate authority. He offered to send me a written explanation of my policy's access requirements for my records. I spent the rest of that afternoon reviewing the documents Tom emailed me. Everything was consistent with what county code enforcement had explained. Insurance requirements were real and important, but they had to be fulfilled through legal methods. Linda's master key approach was circumventing the legal process entirely, but something was still bothering me about Linda's confidence level. She wasn't acting like someone making up false claims. She genuinely seemed to believe she had authority to access my property. That suggested either she was operating from outdated information, or there was some aspect of this situation I hadn't discovered yet. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows across my farm when I noticed movement near my city garden again. Linda's car was parked on the street, engine running, but this time she wasn't alone. Rick was in the passenger seat, and they were both looking at my property. After about 15 minutes, they drove away without approaching my gate. That second surveillance visit made me more uncomfortable than the first one. It suggested they were planning something more systematic than Linda's original master key attempt. Maybe they were trying to figure out alternative access points, or timing when I wouldn't be home to witness whatever they had planned next. I double-checked that my security cameras were working and made sure all my gate locks were secure. The insurance research had given me confidence about my legal position, but it also highlighted that Linda wasn't going to give up easily. She'd invested too much authority in those master keys and that official-looking letter from the property management company. As evening settled over my property, I couldn't shake the feeling that Linda's next move would be more direct and potentially more problematic. The insurance requirements were legitimate, but her methods for meeting them were crossing legal boundaries. People don't usually escalate when they realize they're wrong. They escalate when they're convinced they're right and everyone else is obstructing them. The documentation from Tom and County Code Enforcement was clear about my property rights, but legal clarity doesn't always prevent people from making bad decisions. If Linda was planning to force access to my property despite lacking authority, I needed to be prepared to document whatever she tried next. But what was her real plan if the legal route was already moved? I've always carried deep worries about farm security, mostly from growing up on tales of livestock theft and tool vandalism. Last year I set up what I call my birdhouse camera on a post by the side yard. It looks just like a cute birdhouse my neighbor Emma admired when I mounted it, but inside hides a time-lapse lens recording all that happens close to my property line. 3 days after Linda's surveillance cruise, I scanned the overnight footage and something shot my blood pressure up. The timestamp read 7:23 a.m., and there stood Rick Stone with 2 more crewmen striding across my property line. They weren't trying to sneak either. Rick held the same spray paint can I had spotted during the master key debacle. I watched stunned as they unpacked what looked like measuring gear right on my brick patio. The same patio where I sip coffee each morning, only 15 feet from my back door. Rick was pointing out spots and waving toward the main road, like charting some strange route. Then one crewman began rattling that spray paint can. The rattle of the ball bearing inside the can came loud through the audio track. Rick told him to spray huge red letters across my brick patio, spelling out, "Fire lane, no parking." The paint blazed orange-red, the type used for work zones. It burned like a neon banner against my natural brick. I froze the video and sucked in air. They were spray painting my private land without consent, marking it like some fake public access road. The nerve was staggering, but worse was their calm ease. This wasn't some sloppy vandal job under night cover. They worked in clear daylight like they held every right to be there. I sped through the rest of the tape and timed how long they stayed on my land. 47 minutes of measuring, marking, and spray painting. They even shifted some of my patio furniture to reach deeper spots on the brick. When they left, my once beautiful workspace looked like a city parking zone. Snatching my tape measure, I stepped outside to mark just where they had worked. The paint lines started about 3 feet inside my border, according to the survey stakes, and stretched clear back to my rear gate. I snapped pictures from several angles, catching both the paint and the property line posts in each shot. The tape confirmed what I had already feared. They had marked zones squarely on my side of the legal border. I pulled out my phone and called Emma Rodriguez, who owns the house with the clearest view of my seed yard. "Emma, did you spot anything odd at my place this morning around 7:30? "Oh my God, Jordan, yes." Emma's tone turned sharp with energy. "I was dressing for work and saw those crew guys right on your patio. I even filmed some of it on my phone because it looked so strange. They were spray painting over your lovely brick." Emma arrived within 10 minutes, still in her teaching clothes from morning prep. She queued up the clip on her phone and showed me footage from a whole new angle. Her bedroom window had caught the full incident from the side, plainly showing the crew stepping off community land onto mine. "Watch this part," Emma urged, pointing at her phone screen. "You can see clearly where they crossed the property line. That big oak tree sits right on the border, per the neighborhood survey maps." She was right. The clip showed Rick and his crew passing the oak tree, which I knew pinned the corner of my land. We spent the next hour matching Emma's phone footage with my time-lapse recording. Between the two cameras, we held clear proof of trespass, property harm, and what looked like an effort to fake some bogus emergency access path across private land. I leaned closer to inspect the spray paint scars when I caught detail that made my hands tremble in rage. They hadn't just marked the fire lane path, they had also drawn small orange arrows aimed at my side gate, and what looked like vehicle entry marks near my drive. They were plainly trying to twist my farm into a public road. "Emma, check this," I said, pointing at the arrows. "They're not only marking an emergency path, they're making signs that pretend my property is open for community entry." Emma squinted at the paint and shook her head in disbelief. "That's vandalism, Jordan. And maybe fraud if they're trying to dress your private land as public access." I dialed the non-emergency police line to report the trespass and property damage. The dispatcher logged all the details and said an officer would arrive within the hour to file a formal report. While we waited, Emma and I kept recording every trace with photos and fresh measurements. The worst part wasn't just the spray paint itself, but the intent behind what they aimed to create. By stamping my property as fire lane access, they were basically trying to plant a legal claim that my land was open to emergency trucks. If that ever stuck, it could slash my property value and my rights as an owner. Officer Martinez showed up close to noon, the same officer who had answered Linda's 911 call 3 days earlier. He spotted me right away and asked if this tied to the HOA dispute. When I played the time-lapse footage in Emma's phone clip, his face turned grave. "This is plain trespass and vandalism," Officer Martinez said after scanning both videos. "The paint damage alone could bring charges, but the act of marking private land as public access makes this worse." He snapped clear photos of the paint scars and checked their distance from the line markers. Emma handed over her contact details as a witness and sent her phone video to Officer Martinez. "I've been teaching in this town for 8 years, she told him, "and I've never seen anything like it. These aren't kids doing graffiti. These are grown adults methodically vandalizing someone's home." After the officer drove off, I stood on my patio, staring at the glaring "fire lane" letters smeared over my brick. The paint was already hardening in the hot afternoon, which meant cleaning it would take heavy effort and likely scar the original brick finish. But beyond the property scars, I was rattled by the methodical nature of what they had done. This wasn't some sudden tantrum after Linda's master key fiasco. Someone had staged this act, with measuring gear and official-style spray paint marks in place. I grabbed my phone and replayed the time-lapse one more time. Rick and his crew moved with the confidence of people who thought they held real authority to be there. That suggested Linda had swayed them, or maybe fooled herself, that this painting stunt was somehow legal. The $20 birdhouse camera had caught evidence that would be tough for anyone to deny in court. But as I replayed Rick guiding his crew to mark my private land as public access, I couldn't shake the sense this was only the opening move in something bigger. I had this feeling I just found the ammunition to end this once and for all. The spray paint incident had me thinking about documentation in a whole new way. If Linda and her crew were willing to trespass and vandalize my property, they were either completely ignorant of the law or operating under some authority I didn't understand. Either way, I needed to find the official paperwork that would settle this dispute once and for all. The county recorder's office felt like a relic stuck in the 1980s. Flickering lights, beige walls, and the stale scent of paper and toner. I had never stepped inside before, and my pulse raced as the clerk at the desk nodded, unusually kind when I told her what I was hunting. "You want easement records for your property address?" she asked, typing on a computer that looked older than my truck. "That would be in the land records database. Let me pull up your parcel number." She handed me a form to fill out while she searched the system. Easements are usually recorded when they're created, modified, or terminated. Terminated. That word stuck with me as I filled out the paperwork. The insurance research had shown me that access rights had to be legally documented, but I needed to see the actual legal documents that govern my property. If there was a paper trail showing what rights existed or had been changed, it would prove whether Linda's access claims had any legal foundation. After about 20 minutes, the clerk returned with a thick folder of documents. "Here's everything recorded for your property since 2015, she said, setting the folder on the counter. "The easement records start on page 15. I opened the folder carefully, feeling like I was about to discover evidence that could change everything. The first record I saw was the old fire lane easement from 2016, logged when the subdivision first broke ground. It mapped a 30-foot wide corridor slashing across what is now my side yard and patio. The wording was cold and exact, with surveyor marks and stamps that made my chest tighten. My heart sank as I read through the original easement language. It granted perpetual emergency vehicle access rights for fire safety and community protection purposes. The document was signed by the county engineer, recorded with official stamps, and looked completely legitimate. Maybe Linda had been right about having legal authority after all. But then I hit the paper that made my pulse roar. Page 23 was stamped as Built Revision, AB 2018-47, with a county engineer seal in the corner. The drawing revealed the fire lane had been shifted to the back edge of the community, fully erased from my land. More importantly, the document included a section labeled Vacation of Easement, with detailed legal descriptions of the access rights being terminated on my property. The language was formal and precise, but the meaning was crystal clear. Said easement rights are hereby extinguished and removed from the subject property effective upon recording of this document. I read that vacation section 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. This wasn't some administrative technicality or temporary change. The emergency access rights that originally ran through my property had been permanently and legally terminated by the county engineer. Linda's claims about fire lane access were based on easement rights that no longer existed. The document was signed by the county engineer, the fire marshal, and 2 other officials whose titles I didn't recognize but whose signatures looked impressively official. At the bottom was a recording stamp showing the exact date and time when this revision became legally effective. March 15, 2018 at 2:47 p.m. I asked the clerk to make copies of the entire easement file, especially the as-built revision and vacation documents. "This is pretty standard stuff," she explained, while feeding pages through the copy machine. "When development plans change, the county updates the official records to reflect new utility and access routes. The old easements get vacated so there's no confusion about property rights. No confusion about property rights." That phrase hit me hard because it highlighted exactly what Linda was doing. She was creating confusion about property rights by claiming access authority that had been legally terminated years ago. Whether she knew about the vacation document or not, her actions were based on outdated and invalid legal claims. I drove home with those copied documents feeling like I'd found the smoking gun. The county engineer's stamp wasn't some minor bureaucratic detail. It represented the official legal authority that superseded any HOA regulations or community management policies. If Linda wanted to challenge my property rights, she'd have to challenge a recorded county document signed by multiple government officials. Back home, I laid the records across my kitchen table and snapped crisp photos of each page. The as-built revisions stood out, lined with exact figures and signatures proving the lane was relocated. My hands shook as I stared, the pages glowing under the light like the first breath of freedom for my land. The vacation document wasn't just some old paperwork collecting dust in a government filing cabinet. It was recorded law, signed by people whose job was to make these decisions official and binding. If Linda wanted to claim emergency access authority over my property, she'd need to explain why her master keys mattered more than a county engineer's stamp. I photographed the official county stamps and engineer signatures for extra documentation. Every detail mattered now, from the recording dates to the precise legal descriptions of what had been vacated. This wasn't about my word against Linda's anymore. This was about documented legal facts versus false claims of authority. The more I studied the documents, the more I understood why Linda had seemed so confident about her authority. The original easement was legitimate and properly recorded. Someone looking at outdated information might reasonably believe that emergency access rights still existed. But the vacation document changed everything, and it was recorded with the same level of legal authority as the original easement. As the sun set over my farm, I sat on my spray-painted patio, looking at those official county documents. The fire lane markings that Rick's crew had painted across my brickwork now seemed even more outrageous. They hadn't just vandalized my property. They'd tried to recreate access rights that the county had legally extinguished years ago. Tomorrow, I'd have to decide what to do with this information. The vacation document proved that Linda's access claims were invalid, but it also raised questions about whether she knew the easement had been terminated and was making false claims intentionally, or if she was operating from outdated information and genuinely believed she had legitimate authority. They wanted documentation, time to give them more than they bargained for. The spray paint vandalism, combined with my discovery of the easement vacation documents, meant this needed professional resolution. I contacted Pinnacle Property Management and requested a meeting with their insurance underwriter to address the access rights issue directly. The conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. on Thursday, with Linda attending as HOA president, myself as the affected property owner, and Rebecca Thompson from Atlantic Insurance participating remotely. I spent Tuesday evening organizing my documentation into a clear presentation that would leave no room for misinterpretation. Thursday arrived with nervous energy I remembered from college presentations. I set up my laptop in the dining room with documents arranged by importance. County vacation records first, then spray paint evidence, followed by trespassing documentation from Officer Martinez. Linda arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a leather portfolio that looked expensive and official. When I invited her in, she surveyed my spray-painted patio through the window with an unreadable expression. "Jordan, we need to resolve this situation professionally," she said, settling into a chair across from my laptop. "I agree completely," I replied, opening my county documents folder. "That's why I obtained the official records that govern emergency access rights on my property." Rebecca Thompson appeared on the call sharp at 2 p.m., poised and professional on my laptop screen. "Good afternoon, all. I understand there is conflict over emergency access rights and insurance compliance. Let us begin with the property management side of things." Linda launched into her prepared presentation with confidence that bordered on arrogance. "Atlantic Insurance requires annual vegetation clearance inspections for fire safety compliance," she began, reading from her leather portfolio. "The community has historical emergency access rights through Jordan's property that must be maintained for coverage continuation." Rebecca leaned forward on the video call. "Can you provide current legal documentation for these access rights? Insurance coverage requires verification of legal authority, not just historical claims." I cleared my throat and began sharing my screen to display the county vacation document. "Rebecca, I'd like to share the current legal status of any emergency access rights on my property." Linda's face went pale as the A's-built revision appeared on the laptop screen, complete with the county engineer's official stamp and signatures. "This is County Document AB 2018-47, I explained, highlighting the vacation section with my cursor. "Recorded March 15, 2018, officially terminating all emergency access easement rights on my property. The fire lane was relocated to the back border of the community." The silence that followed was deafening. Linda stared at the laptop screen like she was reading a foreign language while Rebecca took notes and studied the document details. "Linda," Rebecca said carefully, "does the HOA have current legal documentation showing active easement rights for the access route you're claiming?" Linda's polished mask shattered. Her face went scarlet and she clawed through her leather folder in panic. "This is bureaucratic madness," Linda yelled, leaping to her feet so fast her chair scraped. "Community safety needs cannot just vanish because of some stamped paperwork. Insurance compliance is mandatory, regardless of technical document revisions." Rebecca's expression remained neutral, but I could see her making more notes. "Ma'am, insurance companies cannot support coverage for activities that exceed legal authority. Without valid easement rights, we cannot endorse forced access to private property." The underwriter's words were diplomatic but firm. I showed Rebecca the spray paint damage photos next, explaining how Linda's maintenance crew had trespassed and marked my private property as public access. "These markings were created after I denied permission for property access," I said, scrolling through Emma's phone footage. "The crew spent 47 minutes marking areas clearly on my side of the legal property boundary." Linda watched the trespassing footage with growing agitation. When the video showed Rick's crew spray painting fire lane across my brick patio, she jumped up again. "That marking was necessary for emergency vehicle identification. Property owners cannot obstruct community safety requirements." "Property owners cannot obstruct legitimate community safety requirements," I corrected, emphasizing the word legitimate. "But according to the county vacation document, there are no current emergency access requirements on my property." Rebecca reviewed all documentation methodically, while Linda paced around my dining room. The underwriter asked detailed questions about the county recording process, engineering approval signatures, and legal language used in the vacation document. Everything I'd discovered was holding up under professional scrutiny. "Based on this documentation," Rebecca finally said, "Atlantic Insurance cannot support forced access claims that exceed documented legal authority. The county vacation document appears to terminate any insurance-related compliance requirements for the original fire lane route." Linda exploded at that conclusion. "This is complete bureaucratic obstruction. Insurance requirements exist for community protection, not individual property convenience." Rebecca remained professional despite Linda's outburst, but I could see the underwriter documenting Linda's refusal to accept legal facts. "Ma'am, insurance companies must operate within legal boundaries," Rebecca explained patiently. "We cannot endorse activities that constitute trespassing or property damage, regardless of claimed community benefits." Linda slammed her leather portfolio shut and headed toward my front door. "This meeting is pointless if legal documents are going to supersede community safety," she shouted over her shoulder. She stormed out of my house, leaving her chair pushed back and presentation materials scattered on my dining room table. Through the window, I watched her car speed away with tires squealing slightly. Rebecca and I continued the call for another 20 minutes, discussing insurance implications of unauthorized access attempts and property damage. The underwriter confirmed that Atlantic Insurance would be sending a formal letter to the HOA, clarifying that coverage could not support activities exceeding legal authority. After the call ended, I sat in my dining room looking at Linda's abandoned materials. Her leather portfolio contained copies of original easement documents, insurance requirement summaries, and what appeared to be a legal template for demanding property access. Everything was professional and well organized, but it was all based on easement rights that no longer existed. I cleaned up the scattered papers and thought about Linda's reaction to the county vacation document. Her anger seemed genuine, not like someone caught making intentionally false claims. Maybe she really didn't know about the easement termination, but ignorance of current legal status didn't justify trespassing and property damage. The afternoon sun was casting shadows across my spray-painted patio when I realized something significant had just happened. Conference ended in her storming off. "Would you have stayed to face the music if you were her?" She chose to run from the facts, but I knew she'd try one desperate move. I should have expected Linda's desperate move, but I didn't anticipate it would happen at 6:30 in the morning while I was feeding cattle. The sound of voices near my side gate caught my attention as I was checking water levels in the livestock troughs. Linda's voice was unmistakable, and she was directing what sounded like multiple people. Walking toward the commotion, I saw Linda with the same maintenance crew from the spray paint incident, plus 2 additional workers I didn't recognize. Rick was standing near my personal lockbox again, and Linda was holding that familiar ring of master keys, but this time she looked different, angrier, more determined, like someone who had decided to force her way through a problem instead of solving it. Final inspection is mandatory regardless of property owner cooperation, Linda announced to her crew, loud enough that I could hear every word from 50 feet away. She was obviously performing for an audience, trying to establish official authority through volume and repetition. Community safety requirements supersede individual property preferences. I approached the group calmly, pulling out my phone to record everything. Good morning, Linda. This is still private property, and you still don't have permission to access it. My voice was steady, but my heart was already racing. After yesterday's conference call and her stormy exit, I'd expected some kind of retaliation, but not this direct. Linda whirled to face me with rage that had been boiling all night. Jordan, this inspection goes on with or without you. Insurance compliance is never optional. She spun back to my lockbox and stabbed her master keys harder than before. The metallic clacks rang sharper, her crew shifting nervously at her back. Linda, those master keys don't work on my personal locks, and you know it, I said, continuing to record. You're attempting unauthorized access to private security devices, which constitutes trespassing and potential tampering. The legal language felt strange coming out of my mouth, but Officer Martinez had used similar terms during his report on the spray paint incident. That's when Linda completely lost what remained of her professional composure. She yanked on my lockbox so hard that I could hear metal scraping against the mounting bolts. I have authority for community safety inspections, she screamed, waving her master keys like they were some kind of magic wand. Your obstruction endangers the entire neighborhood. Rick and the maintenance crew were shifting uncomfortably, clearly recognizing that this situation had moved beyond normal work orders. One of the new workers I didn't recognize was looking around nervously, probably wondering if he'd signed up for something illegal. The atmosphere felt charged with the kind of tension that precedes either violence or police involvement. At that moment, County Code Enforcement Officer Sarah Chen arrived in her official vehicle. I'd called the county the previous afternoon to request a welfare check, explaining the escalating situation and Linda's refusal to acknowledge the easement vacation documentation. Officer Chen had agreed to be present for any further access attempts. Morning, folks, Officer Chen said, stepping out of her truck with a clipboard and camera. I understand there's a dispute about property access rights and potential code violations. Linda's face went from flushed anger to pale surprise. She clearly hadn't expected official county oversight. Officer, this resident is obstructing mandatory community safety inspections, Linda declared, pointing at me with her keyring. HOA emergency protocols require annual vegetation clearance verification. Her voice had shifted back to official-sounding language, but the desperation was still obvious underneath. Officer Chen walked over to examine my lockbox and the fresh scratches Linda had just created. Ma'am, attempted unauthorized access to private security devices constitutes trespassing under County Code 12-47, she said matter-of-factly. What authority do you have to access this property? Linda pulled out her leather portfolio and started reading from official-looking documents. Community fire lane access rights established under original development easements, she recited. Insurance compliance requirements for emergency vehicle routing. Ma'am, I need to see current legal documentation, not historical references, Officer Chen said patiently. Do you have recorded easement rights or court orders authorizing this access? The question hung in the air while Linda shuffled through her papers frantically. I handed Officer Chen my copies of the county vacation document. These are the current legal records for any emergency access rights on my property, I explained. The original easement was vacated and relocated in 2018. Officer Chen studied the documents carefully, paying particular attention to the engineer stamps and recording dates. This appears to be a legitimate easement vacation, Officer Chen concluded after reviewing the county paperwork. The original access rights were legally terminated and relocated. She looked up at Linda with the expression of someone delivering bad news. Ma'am, you're attempting to exercise easement rights that no longer exist. Linda's reaction was immediate and explosive. That's bureaucratic technicality, she shouted. Community safety doesn't disappear because of engineering paperwork. Officer Chen remained calm but pulled out her citation book. Ma'am, current law overrides old claims. You're trespassing on private land. The scratch of Officer Chen's pen on the citation tore loudly through the calm morning. Rick and the crew edged back from my lockbox, clearly stepping away from the mess Linda was causing. The two new workers traded looks, then drifted off fast toward their truck. Linda Carter, you're receiving a citation for trespassing under County Code 12-47, Officer Chen announced, tearing the yellow copy from her book. Additionally, you're cited for attempted unauthorized access to private security devices under Code 15-23. Linda stared at the citations like they were written in a foreign language. Officer, you don't understand the community safety implications, she protested weakly. Insurance requirements mandate emergency access verification. Officer Chen finished writing and handed Linda both citations. Ma'am, insurance requirements must be fulfilled through legal means, Officer Chen replied diplomatically. Trespassing and property tampering are not legal means. She turned to Rick and the maintenance crew. Gentlemen, I suggest you verify legal authority before participating in future access attempts. After Officer Chen left and the maintenance crew departed, Linda stood alone near my gate, holding her useless master keys and 2 county citations. This isn't over, Jordan, Linda said quietly, but her voice lacked the authority she'd projected earlier. The citations had clearly shaken her confidence in whatever legal interpretation had justified her actions. There are proper procedures for community compliance. I watched her walk back to her car, still clutching those master keys that had caused so much trouble. The irony wasn't lost on me. Those keys probably opened every community lockbox, mailbox cluster, and pool gate in the neighborhood, but they couldn't open basic understanding of property rights or legal authority. No drama needed when you have proper authorities and documentation. Watching her get that citation, I wondered, have you ever seen someone dig their own legal hole this deep? Time to turn all this evidence into consequences that stick. The county citations were just the beginning. Linda's escalating behavior had crossed from HOA overreach into criminal trespassing and property damage. I spent that Friday afternoon organizing every piece of evidence I'd collected into a comprehensive file that would demonstrate a clear pattern of unauthorized activities exceeding any legitimate authority. This wasn't just about my property anymore. This was about establishing legal precedent for HOA authority limits. I started with the county vacation documents, since they formed the legal foundation for everything else. The as-built revision from 2018 wasn't just bureaucratic paperwork. It represented official government engineering decisions that superseded any HOA regulations or community management policies. Linda's claims about emergency access rights were legally baseless, and I had the recorded documentation to prove it. Next came the chronological timeline of escalating violations. Officer Martinez's police report from the original master key incident documented Linda's initial attempt to force access with keys that didn't fit my personal locks. The time-lapse footage from my birdhouse camera showed Rick's crew trespassing and spray painting my private property with fire lane markings. Emma's phone video provided a second angle that clearly captured the crew crossing my property line and vandalizing my brick patio. The insurance documentation added another layer of legal complexity. Rebecca Thompson's formal investigation findings confirmed that Atlantic Insurance could not support coverage for activities that exceeded documented legal authority. The property management company's correction notice requiring Linda's cessation of all access activities pending legal review showed that even her own management structure recognized the violations. Officer Chen's citations for trespassing and attempted tampering provided official county acknowledgement that Linda's actions exceeded legal authority. But the most damning evidence was the audio recording from yesterday's confrontation, where Linda explicitly stated that insurance compliance was mandatory regardless of property owner cooperation. That statement demonstrated willful disregard for legal boundaries. I stacked the evidence into a binder thick with tabs, each page marked by timestamps, witness notes, and photos. The pattern leapt out clear. Linda had moved from failed access to trespassing to outright damage, and finally to clashes with law enforcement. Every stage sat frozen in paper, a story of escalation no one could ignore. The financial impact assessment was particularly compelling. The spray paint damage alone represented hundreds of dollars in restoration costs. The time I'd spent researching legal documents, installing additional security measures, and coordinating with law enforcement represented significant personal expense. Linda's actions had created measurable financial harm through her unauthorized activities. I called Pinnacle Property Management to schedule a meeting with their regional supervisor. Rebecca Thompson from Atlantic Insurance had already indicated that the insurance company would be investigating Linda's misrepresentation of access rights. But I wanted the property management company to understand the full scope of what their HOA president had been doing. David Morrison, the regional supervisor, agreed to meet Monday morning at the Pinnacle Regional Office downtown. I arrived 15 minutes early with 3 copies of my comprehensive evidence file, each organized chronologically from the original easement through Linda's most recent violations. The documentation filled a 2-inch binder with tabs for each category of evidence. Mr. Blake, this situation has created significant liability exposure for multiple parties, David said, settling behind his desk with my evidence file. I walked him through the timeline of escalating incidents, from Linda's initial master key attempt through yesterday's citation for trespassing. She's not just exceeding HOA authority, I explained. She's creating false claims about emergency access rights that were legally terminated years ago. David studied Emma's video footage of the spray paint vandalism with obvious concern. This appears to be intentional property damage under color of authority, he said, making notes in the margin of his copy. The crew was marking private property as public access, which could create ongoing legal complications. The insurance implications were particularly serious. By claiming that emergency access rights existed when they'd been legally vacated, Linda had potentially created coverage issues for the entire community. Mr. Morrison, there's more you need to see, I said, sliding over Linda's threatening email. After yesterday's citations, she fired off a message through the HOA lawyer accusing me of blocking community safety and causing insurance violations. David read Linda's email with growing alarm. She's still claiming authority that the county has confirmed she doesn't possess, he said. The attorney involvement was particularly troubling because it suggested Linda was doubling down on false legal claims rather than accepting the county's determination. David made several phone calls during our meeting, including one to the HOA's insurance broker and another to their legal counsel. I could hear pieces of the conversations, including phrases like exceeded authority, invalid legal claims, and potential criminal liability. By noon, David had issued a formal correction notice to the HOA board requiring Linda's immediate cessation of all property access activities pending legal review. The notice specifically referenced the county vacation documents and Officer Chen's citations as evidence that Linda's claimed authority was invalid. Mr. Blake, Pinnacle Property Management is also opening an internal investigation into HOA leadership decisions that exceed legal authority, David informed me. The investigation would include review of all Linda's access-related activities, not just the incidents on my property. I drove home from that meeting feeling like the legal machinery was finally responding appropriately to Linda's escalating violations. But I also knew that comprehensive documentation had been essential for achieving this level of official response. Emma was waiting in my driveway when I returned home, holding what looked like an official letter. "Jordan, this was delivered to my house by mistake," she said, handing me an envelope marked with the county code enforcement logo. "I think it's about Linda's citations." The letter confirmed that Linda had requested an administrative hearing to contest her trespassing and tampering citations. She was claiming that her HOA authority provided legal justification for accessing my property despite the county vacation documents. I called Officer Chen to discuss Linda's appeal of her citations. "She's claiming that community safety authority supersedes property rights," Officer Chen explained. "The administrative judge will review the easement vacation documents and determine whether her claimed authority has any legal basis." The appeal process meant this dispute would now be resolved through formal county administrative procedures rather than neighborhood negotiations. Linda had chosen to challenge the county's legal authority rather than accept that her access claims were based on terminated easement rights. That evening, I sat on my spray-painted patio reviewing everything that had led to this point. The comprehensive evidence file wasn't just about protecting my property rights anymore. It was about establishing clear legal precedent for HOA authority limits. Every document, photograph, and witness statement contributed to a case that would determine whether community associations could exceed their legitimate authority through persistence and official-sounding claims. In that silence after submitting everything, I knew her world was about to change completely. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on Wednesday, exactly 1 week after Linda's final citation for trespassing. I'd never attended an HOA meeting before, but David Morrison from Pinnacle Property Management had specifically requested my presence to address what he called urgent liability and leadership issues requiring immediate resolution. I arrived at the community center to find it more crowded than usual. Word had apparently spread about Linda's legal troubles and the insurance company's investigation. Emma was there, along with several neighbors I recognized from around the community. The atmosphere felt tense, like people were expecting drama. Linda sat at the head table with 3 other board members, looking smaller somehow than she had during our property confrontations. Her leather portfolio was open in front of her, but she wasn't reading from it with the same confidence she'd displayed earlier. The weight of multiple investigations seemed to have affected her posture and demeanor. David Morrison opened the session, reading a formal notice from Atlantic Insurance. "Coverage is suspended for all emergency access until false claims are withdrawn and damage is resolved." The words were dry corporate lines, but the packed room gasped, neighbors whispering as the weight of the ultimatum sank in. Rebecca Thompson appeared via video conference to explain the insurance investigation findings. "Atlantic has determined that claims of emergency access authority were based on easement rights that were legally terminated in 2018, she announced to the packed room. "Insurance coverage cannot support activities that exceed documented legal authority." Linda tried to interrupt Rebecca's presentation, but David Morrison maintained control of the meeting agenda. "Mrs. Carter, you'll have an opportunity to respond after all investigative findings have been presented," he said diplomatically. Linda's face flushed with frustration, but she remained seated. Officer Chen testified remotely about the trespassing and property tampering citations. County records confirmed that emergency access easement rights were vacated and relocated off the subject property, she reported. The defendant's claimed authority was based on terminated legal rights. Linda was staring at the table during Chen's testimony. The HOA attorney, Martin Reeves, delivered what amounted to a legal reality check. "The board faces potential personal liability for actions that exceed legitimate authority," he explained carefully. "Continuing to claim invalid easement rights could result in additional criminal charges and civil lawsuits." When Linda finally got her chance to respond, her defense was rambling and desperate. Community safety requirements don't disappear because of bureaucratic paperwork, she insisted. Insurance companies and county engineers don't understand the practical realities of neighborhood security. The board members were exchanging uncomfortable glances. Mrs. Carter, David Morrison interrupted gently, do you acknowledge that the county vacation document legally terminated emergency access rights on Mr. Blake's property? The question was direct and unavoidable. Linda's answer would determine whether she was operating from ignorance or willful disregard of legal facts. Linda's reply showed her unraveling. Legal papers can't erase community safety, she cried, voice cracking. Owners owe duties beyond their own convenience. Her hands shook on the desk, eyes glassy as she still refused to admit the county's authority, even while the board and neighbors stared in silence. Board member Patricia Williams spoke up for the first time. Linda, the county engineer isn't creating legal technicalities. They're documenting legal reality. Her voice was calm but firm. We can't base HOA policies on access rights that don't exist anymore. The vote of no confidence was proposed by board member James Mitchell and seconded immediately by Patricia. Given the insurance suspension, county citations, and ongoing legal investigations, I move that the board expresses no confidence in Mrs. Carter's continued leadership, Mitchell announced formally. Linda's face went through a range of emotions as the vote was called: surprise, anger, betrayal, and finally, resignation. You're all abandoning community safety for individual property convenience, she said bitterly. When emergency vehicles can't access critical areas, remember this decision. The vote was unanimous, 4-0, with Linda abstaining. Patricia Williams was elected interim president pending new leadership elections. One of her first actions was authorizing payment for professional removal of the spray paint damage from my property. Martin Reeves outlined the legal settlement requirements that would resolve the outstanding violations. The HOA would cover my property damage repair costs, reimburse my legal research expenses, and issue a formal apology acknowledging that no current emergency access rights existed on my property. But the most significant outcome was the insurance company's demand for updated community policies. Atlantic required new procedures for verifying legal authority before any property access attempts, training for HOA leadership on easement law, and mandatory consultation with county officials for emergency access issues. Linda submitted her resignation letter that night, effective immediately. Her final statement to the board was brief but revealed her continued resistance to legal facts. I resigned due to the board's unwillingness to prioritize community safety over individual property technicalities. She still couldn't accept that legal authority mattered more than her personal interpretation of community needs. So, that's where it ends, me standing on my cleaned-up patio at sunset, staring out at the fire lane that was finally put in the right place. No drama, just paperwork and facts. Funny how her so-called master keys unlocked nothing but chaos, while one stamped document shut it all down. Maybe the real lesson here is that authority isn't about noise or titles. It's about what's written, signed, and real. If you're still here, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this story hit home, you can always tap the little thanks button below to support the channel. Take care of your own gates and keep your keys close.